Chicago, the Windy City, had seen empires rise and fall. But that night, on the 72nd floor of a tower that brushed the sky, it would not be kings or generals who would change the course of history. It would be two lonely souls, a waitress with unpaid bills stacked on the table of a tiny studio in Pilsen, and a billionaire surrounded by luxury yet crushed by a silence no crystal could fill. Their fates would be bound together by one improbable gesture. Sometimes, life doesn't explode, it bends in seconds, in the presence of a glance, a truth, a lie revealed. That night, high above in a tower where luxury seemed to brush the sky, a secret hidden in a crystal glass would change everything. The skyline was not just a restaurant, it was a stage suspended on the 72nd floor, where Chicago's powerful paraded like characters in a silent opera. Chandeliers reflected the glow of the magnificent Mile, and Lake Michigan, framed by vast windows, looked like a living canvas, embroidered with lights that danced on its dark surface. The kitchen was a beating heart, commanded by a French chef who tolerated nothing less than perfection. Out in the dining hall, manager Thomas Hewitt oversaw every detail with the precision of a general, straight posture, rigid expression, voice low and sharp. To him, waiters and waitresses were invisible soldiers, no right to air, no right to speak. Camila Torres knew this better than anyone. She was just a waitress, another shadow dressed in black, trained to smile without showing teeth and vanish among crystal tables and velvet chairs. And yet, there was something in her eyes that betrayed her, too observant, too attentive, as if recording every crack in the glittering masks parading there. At 24, Camila balanced more than trays, she balanced life itself. Between journalism school, long shifts at the restaurant, and overdue bills piling up on the cheap wooden table in her small Pilsen studio, survival was a daily balancing act. Her Latin neighborhood was her route, colorful murals, the smell of tortillas in the air, music spilling from open windows. But each time she stepped onto the 72nd floor of the skyline, it was as if she crossed into another planet where the air smelled of truffles and minutes were bought at the price of gold. Among her co-workers, Camila was respected for her efficiency. Lena, a veteran with 30 years of service, always said, "You've got eyes that see beyond, girl. That's good, but be careful. Those who see too much end up burned." And Camila knew, in that restaurant, seeing too much could cost dearly. At the center of the dining hall, like the sun around which all the evening's luxury revolved, sat Richard Hale. He was 56, silver hair discreetly combed back, beard neatly trimmed. He wore a navy blue tailored suit that rested naturally on his broad shoulders, unpretentious yet unmistakably fine. His eyes, a deep gray, carried something rare for a man of his fortune, weariness. An elegant weariness, but visible to those who knew how to look. Richard was the very definition of influence, a renewable energy magnate, a recognized philanthropist, cited in magazines as a model of visionary leadership. But at that table, under the warm glow of chandeliers, he seemed less a titan of business and more a man in search of company. That company had a name, Vivian Marlowe. At 34, she was the embodiment of modern glamour. A scarlet dress molded to her figure, jewels glittering with every calculated move. Her smile rehearsed, her laughter too soft to be true. She touched Richard's arm lightly, leaned to whisper in his ear, and each gesture seemed choreographed to captivate not only the man beside her, but the entire room watching. Among the staff, whispers spread. That woman was born for the society pages. Or to bring a man to ruin, muttered Lena, the veteran, her eyes wary. Camila approached with her tray. She balanced 3 glasses of red wine and 1 of champagne. Her steps calculated, her smile discreet, her posture impeccable. To Manager Thomas, she was just another employee following orders. To Richard, perhaps not even that, merely part of the scenery. But Camila knew, at that table, every detail mattered. And then she saw it. Vivian's phone, resting on the pale marble, vibrated. For an instant, the glowing screen lit up her perfect face. Camila hadn't meant to look, but she was too close, gathering glasses. The reflection in the crystal betrayed the message as if it had been shouted in her ear. "Damien, has the old man mentioned the environmental fund yet? We need to close this before the trip. The foundation is our way out. The world stopped. The words cut like knives. Environmental fund. Foundation. Way out. And the way he referred to Richard, the old man, revealed everything. It wasn't romance, it wasn't devotion. It was a scheme. A con. Camilla felt her body turn cold. Suddenly she wasn't in the glittering dining hall anymore, but back in her Pilsen studio, remembering her mother's tired eyes, betrayed by her father. The same script, replayed now on a billion-dollar stage. She lifted her eyes. Richard was smiling, serene, with a quiet confidence. There was no naivete in his career of deals, but there was loneliness. A loneliness Vivian masked with her perfect smiles. Camilla gripped the tray tighter. The glasses clinked together. In that instant, caught between silence and courage, she knew that any word could destroy her life. But silence could destroy something far greater. And so it was, among porcelain plates and crystal glasses, that the story of an invisible waitress and a powerful billionaire began to intertwine secretly and forever. Before this story continues, if you already feel the weight of this secret and the tension Camilla carries in silence, hit the like button right now. It shows that you too believe truth must be spoken, even when it costs dearly. The dilemma burned in Camilla's chest like a fire she couldn't put out. Every passing second was an invitation to silence, and silence, here, was the golden rule. At the Skyline, no employee ever dared intervene in a client's life, least of all a client like Richard Hale. Manager Thomas Hewitt repeated it at every pre-shift meeting. You are invisible. The client is king. What happens at their table doesn't exist for you. Camilla had always silently agreed. Rent had to be paid, her textbooks were expensive, and her younger brother needed food in the fridge. But now, after what she had just seen, Thomas's words felt like chains. Vivian kept smiling, her fingertips gliding over Richard's hand, as if nothing had happened. The phone, now face down, rested like a mute accomplice. Richard, oblivious to the poison dripping right before his eyes, lifted his wine glass with the calm of a man who believed he was sitting beside the right woman. Camilla's throat went dry. If she stayed silent, she would betray herself. If she spoke, she would lose everything. She drew in a breath. Decided. The moment came quickly, like a sliver of light before the door shut. Vivian rose, claiming she needed the restroom. The dining hall seemed to exhale at her absence, a brief pause in the performance. Richard remained alone at the table, discreetly reviewing the bill the maitre had just placed before him. Camilla, hands still trembling, approached. Mr. Hale, the word slipped out softly, almost a whisper. Richard lifted his eyes. Gray, intense, weary, yet attentive. He recognized her. You're Camilla, right? He remembered her name. Rare. Most clients never did. The simple fact that he addressed her as a person, not a shadow, almost unraveled her. But Camilla knew she had only seconds. Sir, I know this breaks protocol, and I'll accept any consequence, but the air seemed to vanish from her lungs, the message your companion received. I saw it by accident. And it wasn't from a brother or family. It was about an environmental fund, a foundation, and about deceiving you. Silence grew heavy. Richard studied her, but there was no explosive surprise. Only a dangerous stillness. Camilla pressed on, her voice unsteady. You're free to fire me right here, but I couldn't sleep without telling you. I think they're using your trust for something that isn't real. Richard's eyes stayed fixed on hers, as if searching for signs of a lie. For a moment, Camilla felt he believed her. But then, he simply closed the check folder with calm, as though nothing had happened. Camilla's heart sank. Vivian's soft laughter announced her return before she even appeared. Her expensive perfume lingered in the air as she approached. Seeing Camilla still near the table, her eyes narrowed. Everything all right, darling? she asked Richard, placing a hand on his shoulder. Yes, Richard replied, neutral, without looking at Camilla. The waitress just wanted to confirm everything was in order. Vivian leaned closer, fixing Camilla with a cold smile. Far too attentive, isn't she? She said, like driving a poisoned nail into skin. Camilla swallowed hard and stepped back. She knew she was finished. Minutes later, as Camilla carried a tray of plates back to the kitchen, she felt a firm hand grip her arm. It was Thomas, the manager. My office. Now. His voice was low, but sharp as a blade. In the cramped office at the back of the dining hall, Thomas slammed the door shut. His face was flushed, his eyes sparking with fury. Have you lost your mind? He exploded. Do you have any idea who that man was? Who that woman is? Camilla tried to explain. I couldn't stay silent, Thomas. I saw the message. It was about a scheme, about robbing Mr. Hale. Not another word, the manager slammed the desk, making papers jump. You think you're a journalist now? An investigator? You're a waitress. Your job is to serve and be invisible. Invisible, understand? The words cut deep, but Camilla stood firm. I only did what was right. Thomas laughed, sarcastic. What's right? What you think is right doesn't pay the rent on this floor, doesn't keep this restaurant open. You have no idea what you've just cost us. Mr. Hale accounts for at least 20% of our annual revenue. 20%! And you decided to throw that away because you felt like playing the heroine? Camilla didn't answer. Silence was her last defense. Thomas drew a long breath, his voice now cold and deadly. Get your things. You're fired. If you don't leave right now, I'll call security. The walk to the staff locker room was a corridor of stairs. Some co-workers looked away, afraid to be associated with her. Others stared with a mix of pity and disbelief. Lena, the veteran, murmured. I warned you, girl. Those who see too much end up burned. Camilla traded the black uniform for the simple clothes from her backpack, worn jeans, a wrinkled t-shirt. Each button fastened felt like sealing the end of an entire life. In her bag, she found the envelope with her weekly paycheck. It wouldn't even cover half the rent. She took a deep breath, gathered her things, and crossed the dining hall one last time. The lights, the crystals, the muted laughter all seemed to mock her. At the central table, Richard and Vivian were still there. Vivian watched her pass with triumph, like a queen who had just crushed a rebellious subject. Richard remained motionless, his face impassive. But when Camilla discreetly set the check folder on the table, their eyes met for the briefest instant. And in that instant, she swore she saw something, a spark of recognition, perhaps even gratitude. But then he signed, set down the pen, and turned his face away. In the locker room, as she stowed her uniform for the last time, Camilla opened the folder she had carried with her without realizing. Inside was the paid bill, more than $15,000 in rare dishes, wines, and desserts. On the tip line, a brutal number, 0. For a moment, her heart sank further still. But just below, almost hidden, were 2 words, written in a firm hand. Thank you, Camilla. Her hands trembled. She didn't know if it was irony, genuine, or simply a farewell. But those words would echo inside her for the rest of the night. Outside, Chicago kept pulsing. The cold wind cut through the streets, neon signs glowed, and the lake reflected a city indifferent to her fall. Camilla walked toward the subway, tears finally breaking free from the dam she had held back inside the restaurant. With every step, she felt her life unraveling. No job, no paycheck, debts piled high on the table in Pilsen, and a brother depending on her. There was no room for heroism. Doing the right thing felt like nothing more than another cruel phrase that didn't pay bills. And yet, when she closed her eyes, she saw Richard. She saw his tired smile, saw the trust he placed in that woman, and her stomach churned. Maybe she had lost everything. But at least she had spoken. And it was in that bitter silence, as the Chicago wind swept across her face, that Camila Torres's fall began. Chicago never seemed to sleep. From the tops of its glass towers, lights insisted on defying the darkness, reflected in the lake like jewels spilled by careless hands. But for Camila Torres, that night, the city felt colder than ever. The wind cut her cheeks, and each step toward the subway was like walking through an invisible corridor of judgment. She had lost everything. The job that kept rent paid, food on the table, and textbooks within reach all ripped away in minutes, along with the black uniform now folded forever in her locker. And yet, something inside her pulsed. Not pride. Something deeper, more painful, the conviction that she had done the right thing. The right thing. A heavy phrase, forged in her childhood, when her mother repeated, "Truth can wound, but lies always kill." Words that echoed in her mind like a silent vow. Still, reality was cruel. The right thing didn't pay overdue bills. The right thing didn't fill an empty fridge. The right thing didn't erase the worry from her brother's face when he saw the shelves bare. That night, as the subway carried her back to Pilsen, Camila felt torn. On one side, the moral inheritance of her parents, on the other, the hardness of a city that forgave no innocence. Camila had grown up within narrow walls, painted in bright colors to hide the cracks. Her father, a Mexican immigrant, believed honesty was the only inheritance worthy of leaving to his children. He worked construction, hardening his hands for minimum wage, but refused any dirty shortcuts that could bring in more. "Daughter," he'd say, while teaching her math problems under the dim kitchen light, "the world will try to buy your soul. Don't sell it. Not for gold, not for despair." Her mother, a seamstress, would add, "Sometimes honesty is like walking with stones in your shoes. But in the end, it's the only path that leads anywhere." Camila had learned early the cost of dignity. When her father left, after a betrayal that shattered the family, it was her mother who held them together, sewing dresses through endless nights. Camila had watched silently, absorbing the lesson: life could be unfair, but integrity was never negotiable. Now, years later, that integrity had left her unemployed. The days following her dismissal became a succession of closed doors. Camila handed out resumes in cafes, markets, small restaurants. But the skyline's shadow followed her. Some managers had heard she had caused trouble at the luxury restaurant, others simply didn't want to risk hiring someone without glowing recommendations. In her tiny studio, bills piled higher on the table. Rent was overdue. The fridge echoed like an empty cave. Her younger brother, Mateo, only 16, tried to hide his worry. "It'll work out, sis. You always find a way," he said, forcing a smile. But Camila knew the smile was just a mask for fear. At night, alone, she cried silently. Not for the debts, but for the injustice. Being punished for doing what was right gnawed at her soul. Meanwhile, across Chicago, Richard Hale faced his own ghosts. The man the world saw as a titan of business magazine covers, guest of honor at global forums, actually lived in a fortress of glass and silence. His mansion by the lake was dazzling, but each hallway echoed with emptiness. Richard had built his fortune with intelligence and hard work. From a young age, he refused shortcuts. He had watched colleagues grow rich quickly through corruption and schemes, but he chose longer roads, believing true wealth meant leaving something lasting. He founded clean energy companies, funded research, built philanthropic foundations. But honesty had its price: loneliness. Around him, almost everyone seemed to want something. Partners wanted higher profits, politicians wanted donations, women wanted status. Even Vivian, whom he tried to believe in, showed cracks of pretense. Deep down, Richard knew she didn't love him. But he pretended not to see it, maybe out of fear of admitting his life was nothing more than a castle surrounded by opportunists. That night at the restaurant, something about Camila had touched him. Not just her words, but her courage to speak them. Richard was a man accustomed to flattery, not warnings. He was used to hearing what people wanted him to believe, not what he needed to know. And when that young woman, a mere waitress, dared to risk her job to warn him, something inside him stirred. He couldn't react in front of Vivian. Not yet. He needed proof, needed to watch. But deep down, he already knew Camilla was telling the truth. That's why he had left the 2 words on the receipt, "Thank you, Camilla." It wasn't irony. It was a promise. While Camilla battled bills and rejection, Richard fought another kind of war. He still lived surrounded by luxury, but every dinner with Vivian rang more false. Her eyes sparkled too brightly when she spoke of trips, jewelry, investments. They never sparkled when she spoke of him. Richard spent nights in his study, staring at reports, but his mind always drifted back to the waitress. Who was she? Why had she risked everything? What drove her? He didn't know it yet, but that simple, honest young woman had become the key to his own salvation. For Camilla, the days turned into a routine of searching and disappointment. Money was running out. Debt knocked at the door. There were moments when she almost regretted speaking up. Almost. But then she remembered the message reflected in the glass, Richard's weary smile, and her own mother sewing through the night, whispering, "Truth can wound, but lies always kill." Camilla hadn't chosen the easiest path. But she would choose it again, if she had to. It was on a gray Sunday afternoon, as rain washed the streets of Pilsen, that the unexpected happened. Camilla was coming back from the market with a bag far too light for the weight of their needs at home. When she reached the door of her studio, she saw a black car parked outside. The window slid down slowly, revealing Richard Hale. She froze. "Mr. Hale?" Her voice was pure disbelief. Richard stepped out of the car. His elegant suit seemed out of place against the graffiti-stained walls of the neighborhood, but his gray eyes were different now. There was something human in them, almost vulnerable. "We need to talk, Camilla," he said calmly. And there, beneath the cold Chicago rain, 2 lives broken by the same game of interests began to align again. The sound of rain against Pilsen's streets was like a melancholy drum, keeping time with the harsh rhythm of the neighborhood. Camilla clutched her nearly empty bag of bread, a carton of milk, a few apples, and felt the weight of insufficiency in every step. As she rounded the corner, the black silhouette of the car parked outside her building seemed out of place in the scene. When the window lowered and Richard Hale's face appeared, Camilla thought she was dreaming. "Mr. Hale?" she asked, incredulous. He stepped out of the car. Raindrops clung to his shoulders, but he seemed unconcerned. The man the world knew as a magnate was now just a human being before her, carrying in his eyes the same exhaustion she had seen at the restaurant. "I needed to speak with you," he said plainly. Camilla's heart raced. For an instant, she thought he had come to accuse her, demand a retraction, maybe even threaten her. But his voice held no harshness. It carried gravity. "I don't know if this is a good idea, sir," she began hesitantly, hugging the bag to her chest like a shield. Richard raised a hand, stopping her. "Not as a client. Not as a billionaire. But as a man who owes you more than you can imagine." She blinked, confused. Rain streamed down her face, mingling with tears she could no longer hold back. "Owes me," she repeated, almost laughing at the irony. "Mr. Hale, I lost my job because of you. Because I told the truth. I don't know what you think you owe me." Richard drew a deep breath. He didn't defend himself, didn't argue. He simply looked at her. "I know. And I regret it deeply. But I needed to be sure." "Vivian," his voice faltered for the first time, as if saying her name was painful. "Vivian would never have let me see her true face so easily. You showed me a crack in the veil. And I needed to watch, to wait for the right moment." Anger and pain collided inside Camilla. Part of her wanted to scream, to tell him it wasn't fair. Part of her wanted to believe in the sincerity of this man. While you wait for the right moment, I wait, for rent, she said bitterly. Do you have any idea what it's like to open the fridge and see almost nothing? Richard lowered his eyes, ashamed. No, he admitted. Not like that. For a few seconds, the rain was the only sound. Camilla remembered her mother, nights spent sewing until her fingers bled. Richard remembered his father, a laborer who died young, telling him, honesty is wealth no one can steal. Two different worlds, but the same burden, trying to remain upright in a world that punished integrity. I didn't come here to buy your forgiveness, Richard resumed, steady. I came because I need you. The words struck like thunder. Need me? Camilla repeated, incredulous. I'm just an unemployed waitress, Mr. Hale. He stepped closer. Precisely. Because you're not for sale. Because you've already proven you'd rather lose everything than stay silent in the face of a lie. Camilla bit her lip, confused. And what exactly do you expect from me? Richard inhaled deeply, like a man about to dive into deep waters. I want you to work for me. Not as a waitress. Not as staff. But as someone I can trust. I need eyes that see what mine no longer can. I need someone who won't be fooled by smiles or by figures. Camilla felt the world spin. The offer seemed too absurd. That doesn't make sense. You could hire detectives, private investigators, trained professionals. Why me? Richard looked at her. Because none of them would look at me the way you did. Without interest. Without calculation. Only with truth. Camilla's heart pounded wildly. Part of her wanted to accept, to seize the chance to climb out of the abyss she was in. Part of her feared sinking even deeper into a world that wasn't hers. And if I fail, she asked, almost in a whisper. Richard gave a faint smile, the first in a long time. You've already proven you don't fail when it matters. The rain was falling harder now, but the two of them stood there, unmoving, as if the world itself had paused to witness that moment. Camilla drew in a long breath. She remembered her mother, reminding her that honesty was a path with stones, but the only path that led anywhere. She remembered Matteo, needing food and hope. She remembered the receipt with the words, "Thank you, Camilla." And finally, she made her decision. All right, she said firmly, though her voice trembled. I accept. Richard extended his hand. Then let's begin. Camilla looked at his hand for a moment. Then, she shook it. And in that handshake, a new story began to be written. That night, after accepting Richard's proposal, Camilla could hardly sleep. The worn mattress in her studio felt even more uncomfortable, and the distant rumble of the train passing through Pilsen brought none of its usual comfort. She wondered if she had made the right choice. Accepting Richard's offer could mean plunging into a universe she would never belong to, a universe of gold, crystal, and masks. What if it was all just a game? What if, in trying to be useful, she became nothing more than another disposable pawn? But then she remembered his eyes. Not the eyes of the magnate gracing magazine covers, but the eyes of a weary man, perhaps even grateful, as if he had found in a waitress something he no longer found in anyone else, truth. Camilla woke early, as always. She made coffee with the last spoonful of grounds, split a loaf of bread with Matteo, and pretended to be calm. Did you find something yesterday? He asked, hopeful. Camilla hesitated. She wanted to tell him, but feared disappointing him if everything collapsed. Maybe, she answered. But I don't want to get your hopes up yet. Matteo smiled anyway. You always find a way, sis. His words sounded like both a blessing and a curse. Find a way. That's what she had been doing since her teenage years, since her father left and her mother worked herself to the bone at the sewing machine. Now, more than ever, she needed to find a way. At Richard's mansion, the atmosphere was the opposite. Crystal chandeliers, priceless paintings, flawless designer furniture. And yet, a void lingered that no luxury could fill. Richard spent the morning in his glass-walled office, staring at reports that confirmed his suspicions: strange financial movements in the Environmental Foundation, transactions linked to Damien's companies. He thought of Camilla. Her courage. Her honesty. The risk she had taken just to tell the truth. In that moment, Richard realized something: the entire empire he had built was surrounded by people who feared him, envied him, or desired him. But no one confronted him. No one, except her. 2 days later, a car once again pulled up outside Camilla's modest building. The impeccably dressed driver stepped out and opened the back door. "Miss Torres? Mr. Hale is expecting you." Mateo, watching from the window, widened his eyes. "Whoa, sis, this is like something out of a movie." Camilla drew a deep breath. She wore the plainest clothes she owned: a pair of black pants, a simple long-sleeved blouse, and a gray coat. Her heart pounded like a war drum. Inside the car, the scent of new leather enveloped her. With every street left behind, Camilla felt herself moving further from her world and deeper into another. When the mansion gates opened, she nearly lost her breath. The garden stretched wide, lit with golden lamps, adorned with discreet sculptures and a central fountain. The house itself rose like a modern palace, built of glass and pale stone, reflecting the lake behind it. Crossing the main door, Camilla was greeted by silence. No sound of children, no laughter, no sign of life beyond her own footsteps echoing against marble floors. Richard appeared at the top of the staircase, descending slowly, without any need to impress. He wore simple clothes: white shirt, black trousers, but his presence alone filled the space. "Welcome, Camilla," he said with a faint smile. She glanced around, unable to hide her awe. "This is bigger than anything I've ever seen." Richard chuckled, with a trace of bitterness. "And yet, sometimes, it feels empty." He led her into the living room, where the unlit fireplace served only as decoration. He gestured for her to sit. "I want to be clear from the start," he said. "What I'm going to ask of you won't be easy. It involves risk. It means stepping into a world of masks and turning it against itself." Camilla pressed her hands together in her lap. "And why me?" "Because you've already proven you're the one person who can't be bought," he replied. "And that's exactly what I need." Camilla took a deep breath. She felt fear, yes, but also something new: purpose. For the first time since being fired, she didn't see herself as a victim, but as someone who could choose. "All right," she said firmly. "Whatever you need, I'll do it." Richard tilted his head, as though sealing a silent pact. "Then, Camilla," his eyes gleamed. "Let's unmask the truth together." The days leading up to the dinner were a mixture of anxiety and silence for Camilla. Richard didn't overwhelm her with instructions, he simply said, "I want you to observe. Nothing more." It sounded simple, but to Camilla it felt like asking a beginner to cross a stage in front of the harshest critics. She wasn't a spy, wasn't an investigator. She was just a girl from Pilsen, used to balancing trays and textbooks. Still, there was something in her determination that made her accept the challenge. She remembered her mother's words, that truth could be costly. Now, that price was being collected with interest. Richard, meanwhile, was more restrained than ever. He spent hours in his office, reviewing reports from the Environmental Foundation, analyzing financial moves that confirmed his suspicions. But he knew, without social proof, without exposing Vivian in her own game, it would all remain conjecture. The dinner would be the perfect stage. On the appointed night, Richard's mansion transformed into the setting of a spectacle. Chandeliers glowed, crystal sparkled, tables were laid flawlessly with French porcelain and imported flower arrangements. Everything radiated luxury. But for Richard, it was only a disguise. The true spectacle would happen in the invisible details. Guests arrived in black cars, drivers lined up, gowns and tailored suits gleaming. They were businessmen, investors, and politicians, people accustomed to moving the world with nothing more than a signature on a contract. And at the center of the night was Vivian Marlowe. Dazzling in an emerald green gown that highlighted every curve, she radiated confidence. She greeted everyone like a queen receiving her subjects, always with a rehearsed smile, always with eyes that hid more than they revealed. Camilla observed. Discreet, in a plain uniform, she pretended to be just another member of Richard's staff. But inside, she felt like she was walking a tightrope. One slip, and everyone would see she didn't belong there. As soon as Camilla entered the hall to serve, she felt the stares. Not from all, but from some who noticed the difference. There was something about her presence that didn't fit. She wasn't just another servant trained to vanish. Her eyes, far too attentive, betrayed her role. Vivian, noticing Camilla, narrowed her eyes for an instant. Perhaps she remembered that night at the restaurant. Perhaps she merely found it strange to see her here. But she quickly masked it, resuming her social diva aura. Richard, seated at the head of the table, appeared imperturbable. Yet every gesture was calculated. He watched Vivian with the same focus he gave market charts, as if searching for cracks in her facade. Dinner began with toasts and pleasant speeches. Richard spoke briefly about the future of the Environmental Foundation, highlighting its commitment to global causes. Vivian smiled, applauded, and added her own remarks, praising the values of transparency and irony that nearly made Camilla choke. As the dishes were served, conversations split into small groups. Politicians whispered about elections, businessmen about mergers, and Vivian moved like a dancer, gliding from topic to topic with rehearsed fluency. Then Camilla noticed, Vivian wasn't just speaking, she was guiding. With each comment, she nudged Richard into reinforcing public commitments that Damien and his accomplices could later exploit. Camilla made invisible mental notes, storing every detail. Midway through dinner, one of the guests, a stern-faced banker, raised a delicate question. "Mr. Hale, I've heard rumors that your foundation might expand international partnerships. Is that true?" Richard remained calm. "We're reviewing proposals. But we'll only move forward with something that truly makes sense." Vivian intervened far too quickly. "Of course it's true. In fact, we're already in advanced talks." Richard glanced at her, surprised. The hall fell silent for an instant. Vivian smiled, feigning innocence. "Forgive me, darling. I thought it was already public." Camilla saw it. This wasn't a careless slip. It was strategy, to rush commitments, to expose Richard in front of others. Richard drew a deep breath, regaining control. "As I said, we're reviewing," he repeated firmly. But the crack was there, visible to anyone with eyes sharp enough to see. And Camilla had them. During the pause between courses, Vivian stepped out to the garden with a friend. Camilla, tasked with carrying glasses, followed discreetly. She hid behind a column, close enough to hear fragments. "Damien is getting impatient," Vivian said, her voice low but audible. "If Richard doesn't announce soon, we'll lose investors." The friend murmured something in reply, and Vivian added, "I control him, don't worry. By the end of the month, the fund will be in our name." Camilla felt her blood run cold. This was no longer insinuation. It was confession. Back in the hall, Richard sensed something had changed in Camilla. It wasn't an explicit gesture, but the spark in her eyes when she approached with the tray. He understood, she had discovered something. Dinner continued, but now the tension was palpable. Richard smiled, toasted, but inside he was already weaving the threads of the final confrontation. Vivian, unaware of what was about to unfold, seemed more confident than ever. For the first time, Camilla didn't feel invisible. She felt part of something greater. When the last dish was cleared and the guests began to take their leave, Richard stood. "I thank you all for being here. Tonight has been memorable." Vivian smiled, convinced she had triumphed. But Richard, with a quick glance at Camilla, made it clear the real night was only just beginning. Thus, the dinner ended, not as a banquet but as a carefully staged play. Camilla realized her life would never be the same. She was now inside the game, and there was no easy way out. Richard, for his part, knew he was about to confront not only Vivian, but an entire network of shadowy interests. And both knew the next move would be decisive. The night was already past 11 when the last dishes were removed. The chandeliers still blazed above Richard's grand hall, but the energy had shifted. Conversations had dwindled, and an air of expectation hung in the room. Richard, ever the gentleman, rose and asked everyone to remain a few minutes longer. "There is something I must share," he said gravely. Vivian, at his side, smiled with confidence, certain this would be yet another public display in honor of the foundation. Her green eyes glittered with triumph. Camilla, standing near the wall with her tray now empty, felt her heart race. She knew something was about to happen. "My friends," Richard began, walking slowly toward the head of the table, "tonight we celebrate more than an institution. We celebrate trust." He paused. His gaze swept over every face, pinning them like pieces on a chessboard. Trust is rarer than diamonds. It is more fragile than crystal. Once it breaks, no fortune can restore it. The hall went silent. Some guests exchanged uneasy looks, unsure of where his words were leading. Vivian shifted in her seat, laughing lightly. "What a beautiful speech, darling," she said, trying to dispel the tension. Richard glanced at her sideways, without smiling. And yet, nothing is more devastating than betrayal when it wears the mask of love. The words cut through the air like a blade. Suddenly, Richard placed a leather folder on the table. He opened it calmly, revealing a series of printed documents. "Over the past few months, I've investigated financial movements in our environmental foundation. I discovered transfers linked to shell companies. Companies connected to a name some of you may know, Damien." A murmur rippled through the hall. The banker raised his eyebrows. Richard continued. "These transactions didn't appear out of nowhere. They were induced. Manipulated. And today, I know who was at my side, smiling, while digging a hole beneath my feet." All eyes turned to Vivian. Vivian laughed, as if amused by a joke. "Richard, this is absurd. You're letting paranoia speak louder than reason." He didn't reply immediately. He simply laid copies of emails and contracts on the table. "These are traces linking Damien to the attempt to control the foundation. And not only that, fragments of conversations that reached me, where you, Vivian, confirmed the plan." Her smile faltered for an instant. But soon she put the mask back on. "This is a misunderstanding. You know I only want what's best for you." Richard countered firmly. "The best for me, or for your bank account?" The hall erupted in murmurs. Then Richard did something unexpected. "But it wasn't me who first noticed," he said, turning to the back of the room. "Camilla, please." The tray nearly slipped from her hands. Camilla felt every gaze piercing her. Her instinct was to run, but her legs refused. "Tell them what you saw," Richard asked. Her voice trembled, but she found strength in the memory of her mother and all the nights of sacrifice. "I saw," she began, swallowing hard. "At the restaurant, weeks ago." Vivian's phone reflected in a glass. Damien's message was clear. "Has the old man mentioned the environmental fund? We need to close this before the trip. The foundation is our way out." A deadly silence fell over the room. Vivian rose abruptly. "Lies," she screamed, her voice shrill. "A fired waitress, seeking revenge." "You'd believe her?" Camilla recoiled, but Richard wouldn't let the attack go further. "I believed her because there was nothing left in you that was trustworthy." Vivian tried to recover, but the evidence was overwhelming. The guests, once dazzled by her presence, now averted their eyes. The banker cleared his throat and said harshly, "This cannot continue, Mr. Hale. The reputation of the foundation demands immediate measures." Vivian, seeing herself cornered, dropped the mask. "You don't understand," she shouted, eyes blazing. "Richard would never have gone this far without me. I deserved my share. I deserved it. It was too late." The spell was broken. She was exposed, stripped bare before the elite. No more smiles, no more curtains. Only raw greed. And when she realized there was no escape, Vivian stormed out, the emerald dress dragging behind her like a defeated banner. The silence that followed was thick. Richard exhaled deeply, then turned to Camilla. "It was her," he said, pointing to the young woman still clutching the tray like a shield. "A girl who owed nothing to anyone in this room. She was the one who had the courage to speak when all others stayed silent." Camilla flushed, not knowing where to hide her face. But for the first time, she wasn't invisible. Richard continued. "Do not believe that fortune builds trust. Do not believe that power buys loyalty. Tonight I learned that truth can come from the most unlikely voice." The guests nodded, uncomfortable. Some even clapped, timidly. When the hall finally emptied, Richard approached Camilla. "You didn't lose your job at the Skyline, Camilla. You gained something greater." She frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Richard placed a folder in her hands. "I want you to work with me. Officially. Not as an invisible employee, but as a trusted assistant. And beyond that," he paused, "I've already arranged a full scholarship for you to finish your journalism degree. You deserve the voice that someone once tried to silence." Tears welled in Camilla's eyes without permission. She tried to speak, but only managed to whisper. "Thank you." Richard smiled, serene. "Don't thank me. Just keep being who you are. That is worth more than any fortune." That night, as Camilla left the mansion, she no longer felt like a shadow. She felt whole. She understood that honesty could cost dearly, but in the end, it always became something greater. Not money, not luxury, but dignity, a future. And as she looked up at Chicago's dark sky, Camilla smiled. For the first time in a long time, she felt that the right thing had finally won. And you, if you were in Camilla's place, would you have had the courage to risk everything to tell the truth? If this story touched you, leave a comment, share it with someone special, and subscribe to the channel to follow the next stories.